In this video, we'll learn about using MARI's node graph in advanced mode. Alright, so I have this same basic project that we started with in the last video here. No shaders, simple asset, and only a single diffuse channel with a base layer inside of it. So really, we're starting fresh at this point. Now, the main difference in the advanced mode in comparison to basic mode is that we're really not going to use node graph layers. The entirety of the node graph behind the scenes inside of MARI is exposed to us when in advanced mode. So let's jump up here to the Edit menu, go to Preferences, and on the Node Graph tab, we'll go ahead and enable Advanced View. And it's just that simple. So now we're ready to work in the node graph. We can come over here and open our node graph palette as well as our node properties palette, which the two really go hand in hand. And you can see here inside our node graph, we actually have some nodes that have already been created. We have here a channel, the diffuse channel. We have a layer in that base layer. And then we have underneath that base layer, we've defined what exactly is underneath that, and it's transparency, bottom transparency node. Things to take note of here with this base layer, it is a paint layer, so it comes with this paint node right here. And you can see if we double click on that and we come over to it, you can see there is information here about it. It is locked. Again, at the time of project creation, we specified that. But we could come in here and create new paint nodes at any time. So in looking here, we can zoom out a little bit and see there's a viewer node here as well. More on that here in just a moment. But I want to sort of do a comparison here, or at least breakdown, as far as how data gets created in the node graph in comparison to a layer stack. Because really it is read in the exact opposite direction. So let's do this. I'm going to deselect any nodes. Let's just come in and create a procedural layer. We'll do that first. We'll go ahead and create a procedural color layer right over here. And I want you to watch the node graph over here. Come over and create a color procedural. And you can see where that gets dropped in. It gets dropped in below the base layer. So we're reading this particular graph from top to bottom. So we're starting here, we're adding to it, and then we're adding again. Now this procedural color layer, you can see it does have a procedural color node right here. Now it's currently connected to the mask input up here, but you can see it is also connected to the channel right over here. So we're starting to build this node graph. Now we could come in here and start to disconnect some nodes. What happens if we disconnected this mask? Well, you can see that's a pretty safe thing to do. We can come over, double click on that color procedural node and change the color. Let's maybe just give it, I don't know, something like this blue color. There we go. Everything's behaving exactly as we would expect it to. So let's go ahead and kind of set up a similar situation as what we had in the previous video. I'm going to hit the Tab key and add in yet another color procedural layer. And then I'm going to take this procedural color layer's output and this color layers, or I call it a layer, these two nodes outputs, and let's merge them together. So we'll just create a merge node. There we go. And you can see where that got created, and it automatically shifted the output of the merge node to the channel. So we'll come over and connect our second color procedural. And let's come over here and make a mask for it. We'll just, again, make a... let's go ahead and do... Where was that oil? It's under procedural, miscellaneous. There we go. Okay, so I had the merge node selected, so that got created in the wrong spot. So that's okay. We'll go ahead and disconnect that. There we go. We'll go ahead and connect it up to the mask, just like so. And we'll go ahead and swing our input for the diffuse channel back over to the merge node. And voila, there we go. We now have two of our colors being modulated together here, again masked out by this oil. So this is again kind of similar to what we were looking at in the previous video. We've got our node graph here. We're creating a node graph that is defining the color look. So I'm just going to take all of these nodes, hit Control G to group those together here. And let's come over here and let's go ahead and drop in a shader. Now, what we're looking at here went all wonky on us. It went white. So before we drop in that shader, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this viewer node right here. So we can attach this viewer node to really anything inside of our node graph to view that on the canvas. So if we wanted to, we could come over and select that diffuse node and tap the 1 key on it. And you can see we have basically attached the viewer node to the diffuse node here. And thus we are now looking at the total information contained in that diffuse channel. Again, that's all through this group right here. You can see there are several inputs exposed on the group, which is okay for right now. So let's go ahead and just drop in, I'll just drop in another color procedural layer, or procedural node, and I'm going to drop in a merge node. And we'll come over here, just kind of setting up the same scenario that we had in the previous video. And I'll take the defaults there because we want to mask this out. There we go. And we can come in and fill with white after making a selection here of the 2 skin meshes. And then we could come in and make sure we have kind of a skin color here. All right, great. So all of our shading has disappeared, and that's okay. I'm not too concerned about that right now. But what I would like to do is add in a shader. Let's just use something simple. I'm going to come in and add in a blend. Now, you'll notice that when I do that, we have a connection here that is made between the shader and the viewer. We're looking at the shader at this point, but there's really nothing connected to it. So what we could do is come over here and find our diffuse. Let's come over and connect that diffuse channel, just like so. And there we go. Now we have our information back here on the canvas. So this shader looks a little bit scary. It's got lots and lots of pipes growing out of it, and that's okay. But keep in mind that this is behind the scenes everything that MARI is doing to create the textures for your asset. So all of the nodes that we have right over here, these are arguably our diffuse nodes. So we could come in here and kind of organize this in such a way to where we have a graph over here that's creating diffuse color information. We maybe have another graph in another location that's creating specular color, specular roughness or glossiness, basically whatever inputs we need for our own personal projects. Now, some tools that will help you to sort of organize this node graph, you can come over here, and in this case, for maybe these nodes right here, if we wanted to create some visual separation inside the node graph to kind of push these guys into their own sort of bucket, we could use what's called a backdrop. So if I were to come over here and create a backdrop node, you'll find that under miscellaneous. You'll see here that we get this little guy that's created. Now we can move all those nodes around. We can enlarge this guy. If I can get, there we go. And we can add nodes to it by simply dragging them into it. Let me see if I can type. There we go. And I'll just take this node and simply drag it over. And you can see that once it highlights in yellow, we'll be dropping that node inside. And it is now a part of that backdrop. We can just simply drag it out and delete it if we need to. But basically, these backdrops are really, really useful. It's a way of kind of coming in and saying, okay, all these nodes are related. They're all diffuse color. So I'm going to put a backdrop around them, double click on the backdrop's header, and come over and title this. Let me make sure I did that. Double click. Call this backdrop diffuse color. And then when we come back over here and zoom in on that backdrop, you can see that diffuse color is listed right over here. So we've got all of the nodes that are related to that sort of organized inside of this backdrop. Pretty handy, especially when you're working with a fairly complex node graph, which inevitably you're going to get to that point if you're using advanced mode because you have all of these different texture channels to create information for. So now one way that we could sort of organize our node graph, if we ever have the need to, inevitably it'll get kind of messy, and you may want to sort of have MARI just lay everything out for you. We can do that by right-clicking and choosing this auto place option. So if I were to do that here, in the case of this particular example, it's not doing much because of the backdrop, but you can see that it did move the shader and the viewer nodes down here pretty close to one another. So now with this viewer node, again, I mentioned it's whatever we're viewing at the current point. If we wanted to, we could come over here and select our diffuse channel and tap the 1 key on our keyboard, and that moves the viewer from the shader to the channel. So we can now look at just the diffuse information. If we wanted to come back, we just simply come back over and select our shader and tap the 1 key again, and now we're looking at the shader. But this can go as far down as we want to. Maybe we wanted to come in and look at this oil procedural. Let's tap the 1 key there, and you can see now we're just looking at that oil procedural. So it's pretty handy. Let me just jump back over here and set the viewer back to the shader. All right, great. Now, there are a couple other things that I wanted to show you here inside the node graph when you're in advanced mode that you'll find useful. The first one is a function called jump to node. When you get a fairly complex node graph built, finding exactly the node you're looking for can sometimes be something that takes a little bit of time. So MARI has a pretty useful function called jump to node. And we can use that just simply by tapping the J key on our keyboard. So let's see if we can't find maybe the oil node. If I were to type that in, you'll notice that nothing comes up. Well, that oil node is actually inside of a group. So we can't actually get to that from here, but we can come in and type in color, and there we go. We can jump quickly over to this color node. Now, what about that oil node? If we really wanted to get to that, remember it is inside this group. So we could type the J key, do oil, and there we go. There's our oil node. So this again is the jump to node function. Super, super useful, especially with big node graphs that you're working on. Now the other thing I wanted to show you relates to this group here. So this group is one that we built and we created as part of the diffuse color. Now we could come over to the node properties, and at the group level you'll see here that really this has very limited properties, but there is a button here called export as gizmo. Now export as gizmo is something that's useful if you want to take a portion of your node graph and send it over to another artist. So we can simply tap this button and you can save out your gizmo as a .mng file, MARI node graph. Now, when you go to import this on another computer, you'll want to make sure that this is saved inside the C users folder, and then the username, and then documents, and then there's a MARI folder, and inside that there'll be a gizmos folder. That's where you'll need to load any gizmos from. So, again, that is how you can export a gizmo here inside of MARI. Now, lastly, you can see here that there's really, at the group level, very limited properties that have been exposed. Now, we can tap this little P key right over here, and we can come in and we can choose to expose a number of the properties that may be located inside this group or on nodes that live inside this group. We can simply choose this pick button here, and you can see there are a number of nodes inside there, and each one is sort of split out into this hierarchy. And let's say we wanted to scroll down and find our oil node again. There it is. And we wanted to expose maybe these 3 properties right here. Simply click OK, and you can see there they are, right here inside of the group properties for this node. We can come in here and we can move them around using some of these other ones if we wanted to shift them up or shift them down, rearrange them here. Again, entirely up to you, but this is how we can begin to expose properties at the group level when you're working inside MARI's node graph. Again, this is advanced mode. If you're new to the node graph inside of MARI, I would encourage you to start with basic mode using the node graph layers because it can get really, really complex inside of advanced mode really, really quickly, especially when you're working with the shader nodes.